Abandoned by her own guard, the alien queen was defended by a human. The capital of the Aurelian conquered was built to last forever. Its towers were grown, not constructed, rising like frozen light from the planet's surface. For centuries, no enemy fleet had breached its skies, and no army had marched through its streets. The danger that came that day did not arrive from the stars. It was born inside the palace itself. Queen Zervala stood alone in the grand chamber, her long robes brushing the crystal floor as warning lights pulsed along the walls. The chamber was vast, designed to remind all who entered that the conquered was ancient and unbreakable. Now it felt empty. The royal guard should have been there, standing in perfect formation, weapons ready, eyes loyal. Instead, the hall echoed with silence. Moments earlier, they had been present. Then came the message, short, cold, and final. The High Command had declared her unfit to rule. Her policies of restraint, her refusal to crush weaker systems, her attempts at peace with emerging species like humans had been called failures. The guards had lowered their weapons, not toward her enemies, but toward the floor. Without meeting her gaze, they had turned and walked away. Zervala had not screamed. Queens of her kind were trained never to show weakness. But when the chamber doors sealed behind them, something inside her broke. She had ruled for 20 cycles. She had trusted those guards with her life. Now, alarms wailed and rebel forces moved through the palace corridors, hunting her like prey. She fled through side passages known only to old rulers and forgotten servants. The air smelled of smoke and melted crystal. Distant explosions shook the walls. The queen stumbled once, a sharp pain flashing through her side where debris had cut her during her escape. Blood, glowing faintly blue, stained her hand. She pressed on. Stopping meant death. Above ground, the city burned. Civilian transport lanes were jammed with panicked traffic. Communication channels were flooded with false orders and rebel propaganda. In the chaos, a small human evacuation unit moved carefully through the streets. Elia's ward had been deployed to the conquered as part of a joint security agreement. Humans were still considered a young species, useful but not important. Their job today was simple: escort non-combatants to a safe zone until extraction ships arrived. Elias focused on the mission, rifle steady, eyes scanning for threats. He was not thinking about politics or alien power struggles. He was thinking about the child gripping his mother's hand behind him and the smoke filling the sky. A shockwave knocked him off balance. He recovered quickly, pulling a civilian down as debris crashed nearby. His comm unit crackled with confused orders. Then it went silent. The network was compromised. Elias swore under his breath and signaled his squad to hold position. That was when he saw her. She emerged from a damaged service tunnel, moving unsteadily, her regal appearance shattered by ash and blood. Elias recognized her immediately. Every being in the conquered knew the queen's image. She was supposed to be the most protected individual on the planet. Seeing her alone, injured, and running was unreal. For a second, Elias froze. This was far beyond his assignment. Then motion detectors screamed, and rebel soldiers appeared at the far end of the street. Their armor bore the old conquered symbol, twisted into something sharp and cruel. They saw the queen too. Everything happened fast. Elias stepped forward without thinking, pushing civilians behind cover. He raised his rifle and planted his feet in the open street, directly between the rebels and the fleeing monarch. The rebels shouted for him to move. They told him the queen was no longer under protection. They said this was not humanity's concern. Elias did not answer. He fired. The sound of human weapons was different from conquered arms. Short, violent bursts echoed through the street. Elias aimed carefully, not to kill if he could help it, but to stop. Sparks flew as shots struck armor. The rebels scattered, surprised by resistance from a single human unit. Zervala watched from the shadows, stunned. The human should have retreated. His species was known for survival instincts, for knowing when to run. Yet he stood firm, exposed, drawing fire toward himself. Elias shouted into his comm, broadcasting a general distress call on every frequency he could reach. He knew no one was coming. That was not the point. If the rebels believed reinforcements were near, they might hesitate. The Queen understood then. He was buying time. For her. She turned and ran, pain screaming through her body. Every instinct told her not to leave him, but she knew his sacrifice would mean nothing if she died there. She disappeared into the ruins as blaster fire tore the air behind her. Elias moved constantly, using wreckage for cover, throwing a small charge to collapse part of the street and slow the rebels. One shot burned across his shoulder, spinning him into the ground. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest, but they endured. Finally, the rebels pulled back. The false distress signals had done their job. They retreated to regroup, unwilling to risk a larger engagement. Elias lay against a broken wall, breathing hard, blood soaking into his uniform. He laughed weakly at the sky, amazed he was still alive. Minutes passed. Smoke drifted. Then a shadow fell over him. Zervala stood there, supported by a piece of fallen structure. She should have kept running. Instead, she had returned. Slowly, carefully, she helped him to his feet. Her grip was firm despite her injury. "Why?" she asked, her voice low and strained. "My own guard abandoned me." "Doesn't matter who they are." Its engines pushed ash and debris aside as it landed hard, side doors opening before it fully settled. Human soldiers rushed out, weapons ready, scanning for threats. They froze when they saw who Elias was leaning against. The alien queen of the Aurelian Conquered stood in the open, wounded, exhausted, and alive. For a moment, no one moved. Training did not cover this. Elias straightened as best he could and raised a hand. "She's with us," he said, his voice rough but steady. "She needs medical help." A medic pressed a seal over Elias' shoulder wound while another examined the queen with careful respect. Zervala sat upright, refusing to lie down, her eyes watching everything. She had been surrounded by servants all her life, yet she had never seen care given so quickly, so directly, without ceremony. No one bowed. No one waited for permission. They simply acted. The transport joined a small convoy heading toward orbit. Communication channels buzzed with confusion. Human Command had just received confirmation that the Conquered's ruling monarch was aboard one of their ships. Orders changed rapidly, then changed again. Protect the civilians. Secure the Queen. Avoid direct conflict unless necessary. No one wanted to be responsible for starting an interstellar war. Elias drifted in and out of focus as pain and exhaustion caught up with him. He felt a cool hand rest briefly on his arm. When he opened his eyes, Zervala was looking at him. "You should have stayed down," she said. "So should you," Elias replied weakly. Something like amusement flickered across her features, brief but real. The human fleet carrier waited beyond the atmosphere, a massive structure compared to Conquered ships, rough in design but solid and familiar. The transport docked, and the Queen was escorted into a secure medical section. Word spread fast through the ship. Crew members whispered as she passed. Some stared. Others simply nodded and returned to their duties. Zervala noticed that too. She was given a private room, but she did not feel imprisoned. The guards outside were human, rotating regularly, alert but calm. They did not watch her with suspicion. They watched the hallway. Elias was taken to a recovery ward. When he woke fully hours later, he expected questioning or punishment. Instead, a senior officer stood at the foot of his bed, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You stepped between a deposed monarch and armed rebels," the officer said, "without orders." News of the Queen's survival spread through the Conquered like a shockwave. Rebel leaders claimed she was being held hostage by humans. Others insisted she had fled to plot revenge. Civil systems fractured, unsure who to believe. Loyalist worlds hesitated, waiting for proof she lived. Zervala watched the chaos unfold from a secure observation room aboard the carrier. Human analysts worked openly nearby, projecting maps, debating strategies, questioning assumptions. They spoke freely, even in disagreement, yet decisions were clear once made. she realized something unsettling. Her own government had prized unity so highly that dissent had been quietly erased. Humans allowed disagreement and somehow remained united when it mattered. She requested to see Elias. When he entered the room, still pale but walking on his own, she dismissed the others. They obeyed without question, yet not with fear. "You saved my life," she said, "but you also placed your people in danger." "Maybe that's why it broke," Elias said before he could stop himself. Silence followed. Elias lowered his gaze, expecting anger. Instead, the queen exhaled slowly. "Perhaps," she said, "perhaps you are right." How they had prepared to replace her long before the alarm sounded. "They did not fail because they hated me," she said. "They failed because they believed loyalty was automatic." Keeping the queen meant becoming a target. Returning her could mean handing her back to enemies. Doing nothing would let the conquered fall into civil war. Zervala made the decision for them. She requested a broadcast. Human commanders hesitated. A live message could provoke the rebels. It could also change everything. In the end, they agreed. The signal went out across conquered space. Emergency channels, civilian networks, military relays. Zervala appeared on countless screens, seated simply, without crown or guard. "I live," she said, "not because my throne protected me, but because one who owed me nothing chose to stand." She spoke of a future where loyalty was earned, not programmed. Then she did something no ruler of the conquered had ever done. She thanked humanity. Across human space, the message spread just as fast. Citizens who barely knew the conquered's name saw an alien queen acknowledge a single human soldier. Recruitment offices saw a rise in volunteers, not for glory, for principle. Elias watched the broadcast from his ward, stunned. "I didn't ask for that," he muttered. A nurse smiled. "Heroes rarely do." She was a queen without a throne, protected by a species her own people once dismissed as weak. Behind her, Elias approached quietly. "What happens now?" he asked. She turned to face him. "Now," she said, "I stop running, but I will not return the way I left." Humanity had not, and the galaxy was beginning to notice. The human fleet did not rush into battle. Instead, it moved with care, forming defensive lines around key systems where conquered civilians were fleeing. To many alien observers, this made no sense. A show of force would have ended the rebellion quickly. Humans chose patience. Queen Zervala watched this from the command deck of the carrier. She had been offered a ceremonial seat, but she refused it. Instead, she stood beside the analysts and officers, listening, asking questions, learning. No one treated her as decoration. When she spoke, they listened. When she was silent, they continued their work. This was new to her. Reports came in daily. Rebel fleets were fragmenting. Some commanders defected after her broadcast. Others doubled down, spreading fear, claiming humans were planning to rule the conquered. The truth was quieter and harder to fight. Humans were not issuing demands. They were offering protection to civilians and safe passage to loyal worlds. Elias returned to duty faster than expected. His wound healed well, but the experience had changed him. Wherever he went, people recognized him. He tried to avoid attention, focusing on escort missions and security patrols. Still, he felt the weight of what he had done growing heavier each day. One evening, Zervala asked him to walk with her through the civilian sections of the carrier. They passed families from many species, sharing limited space without complaint. Human children played beside alien ones. Food lines were long but orderly. Volunteers handed out blankets and spoke softly to the frightened. "They trust you," Zervala said. "They trust the system," Elias replied. "It's not perfect, but it tries." Some bore conquered markings. Others were human. They moved together, carefully coordinated. "I want to return," Zervala said quietly, "but not to reclaim power the old way." Instead of issuing royal commands, Zervala traveled with the human fleet, broadcasting from ship to ship, station to station. She spoke to workers, soldiers, and civilians directly. She listened to their anger and fear. Sometimes they shouted. Sometimes they cried. She stayed every time. Humans helped coordinate these meetings, providing security but never control. They did not speak for her. They stood beside her. Rebel leaders tried to assassinate her twice. Both attempts failed, not because of overwhelming force, but because humans anticipated unpredictability. They changed routes. They trusted local informants. They adapted. Each failure weakened the rebels further. Meanwhile, Elias was reassigned to a mixed-species unit tasked with securing supply routes. His team included conquered veterans who had lost faith in the high command. At first, they watched him closely, uncertain. "You really stood alone for her?" one asked during a patrol. "Yes," Elias said. "Why?" It was not a glorious fortress, just a heavily armed hub controlling vital resources. The rebels believed humans would attack directly. They did not. Instead, human ships cut supply lines with precision, allowing evacuation corridors for civilians. Rebel morale collapsed as support vanished. Conquered loyalists advanced, not to destroy, but to arrest and secure. Zervala arrived after the fighting ended. She walked through the site without guards, speaking to surrendered rebels. Some refused to meet her eyes, others wept. "I will not punish you for fear," she told them, "but I will not allow fear to rule again." She was still a queen, but now her strength came from connection, not distance. Humans respected her not because of her title, but because she stood where danger had been. Yet doubt remained. Human command worried about overreach. Some politicians questioned why resources were being spent on an alien civil war. Zervala addressed them too, refusing special treatment. "I was defended when abandoned," she said. "Not because I was powerful, but because I was vulnerable. That choice defines who you are. Do not lose it." "The cost." "This human stood when my guard did not," Zervala said, her voice carrying across the square. "Not because he was ordered, because he chose to." Accepting that strength did not come from fear. As night fell over the capital, lights slowly returned to the city. Zervala looked out over her world, no longer alone. The queen had been abandoned, but she had found allies who stood not because they had to, but because they believed it was right. And that belief was stronger than any throne. The capital did not celebrate the queen's return. There were no banners, no songs, no forced displays of loyalty. The city was quiet, wounded, and uncertain. That silence mattered more than any cheer. Zervala understood that trust could not be commanded back into existence. It had to be rebuilt slowly, honestly. The first days were spent stabilizing what remained. Power grids were repaired. Food routes reopened. Communication channels were cleaned of false signals. Human engineers worked beside conquered technicians, sharing tools and methods without claiming control. When problems appeared, teams argued, tested, failed, and tried again. Progress was not fast, but it was real. Elias remained close, not as a symbol, but as a soldier assigned to security coordination. He disliked the attention that still followed him. To him, the city was just another dangerous place that needed protecting. Yet people noticed how he moved through the streets without fear or pride, how he spoke politely to everyone, how he treated the queen like a person rather than an idea. Rebel resistance did not vanish overnight. Small groups remained hidden in the outer districts and nearby systems. They expected the queen to strike hard to make examples. When that did not happen, confusion spread among them. Some surrendered. Others waited, unsure how to fight a ruler who refused to rule through terror. A final threat emerged a week later. A splinter fleet made of the most extreme rebel elements jumped into the system without warning. They bypassed the capital and aimed for civilian habitats in orbit, believing the queen's restraint made her weak. Panic flared across the network. Human and conquered ships responded together. There was no time for debate. Command roles shifted naturally, based on position and capability. Elias was deployed with a rapid response boarding unit tasked with protecting evacuation routes. The fighting was brief but intense. The rebels fought desperately, knowing they had no future if they failed. Humans adapted quickly, switching tactics when initial plans failed. Conquered crews followed, learning in real time. Civilians escaped. The habitats held. When the last rebel ship was disabled, the system went quiet again. Zervala watched the battle from the command center, hands clenched, heart heavy. She had hoped it would not come to this, but she did not regret her choices. Protection had come first, always. Afterward, she requested something unexpected, a public tribunal, not to punish but to explain. Captured rebel leaders were brought forward. They expected execution or imprisonment. Instead, they were asked to speak, to explain their fear, their anger, their reasons. The conquered watched. Some excuses collapsed under scrutiny. Others revealed deep failures in the old system. Zervala listened to all of it. When it was her turn to speak, she did not defend herself. "I failed to see how afraid you were," she said. "I believed silence meant agreement. I was wrong." As ships powered down and departure schedules were announced, many conquered citizens felt something like fear again. Not of humans leaving, but of standing alone. Zervala addressed that fear directly. "You are not losing protectors," she said. "You are gaining responsibility." The broken crystal walls remained unrepaired. Light filtered in unevenly, casting sharp shadows. Zervala stood before representatives of the conquered and the human delegation. Elias stood at the back, hoping to disappear into the crowd. He did not. The queen spoke clearly, her voice steady. "This chamber once symbolized unbreakable authority," she said, "but authority broke. What remained was choice. I offer this not as ownership, but as trust." He looked around the chamber, at aliens who once saw humans as weak, at leaders learning humility, at a queen who had lost everything and rebuilt it differently. "I don't want symbols," he said quietly. "I want this to last." The human fleet departed the next day. As the last ship disappeared into jump space, Zervala stood beside Elias on a high balcony overlooking the city. The conquered capital was still scarred, but lights glowed steadily now. Life continued. "What will they say about this?" Elias asked. Zervala looked up at the stars. "They will say a queen was abandoned," she replied. "And that humanity stood. And of a queen who learned that the greatest defense was not a guard that obeyed, but allies who chose to stand."